discutiremos sobre desinformación y los cambios que las diferentes tecnologías emergentes generan sobre la sociedad con el profesor James Katz, que le damos la bienvenida. Él está de visita con nosotros en Chile durante esta semana en donde estamos conmemorando el Día Internacional de la Libertad de Prensa en un proyecto que estamos realizando junto a la Embajada de Estados Unidos. El profesor Katz es doctor en Sociología de la Universidad de Rutgers, es Feld Professor de Emerging Media Studies de la Universidad de Boston y ha dedicado su vida entera al estudio de cómo las energías, los medios de comunicación influencian en la sociedad, y últimamente ha estado muy metido en cómo el cambio, por ejemplo, de la inteligencia artificial va a generar algunos cambios bastante notables en educación y en algunas otras disciplinas, por ejemplo, los trabajos. So this second part will be in English. I want to welcome Mr. James Katz. Thank you very much for coming today. We will talk about how this emerging media is influencing the society, and we want to know different aspects on how regulation could improve, like the use of algorithms and others. So thank you for coming, and thank you and welcome to Chile.
Thank you. It's my great honor to be here, and I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to share some of my research with your audience.
Thank you. The first that I wanted to know is that we actually live in a world with a giant flow of information. What are the risks posed by this phenomenon of fake news? How this could influence like the elections as we see in the United States, but also in other countries of the world?
Yes, well, fake information, fake news has a fundamental attack on people's trust in institutions. And this is where I see its greatest danger, because institutions may have various ideas about how to protect us from plagues or from epidemics. But on that hand, it is also, if people don't trust the information, they will reject it and not act on it. The best case is vaccinations, and we're seeing the rise of diseases that we thought had been largely, or if not completely, eradicated, such as polio. We see these things coming back and spreading. We see that in the United States, and we see it in Chile, and we see it around the world, because people have bad information about vaccines spread by fake news and misinformation and disinformation, and this then leads to people not getting life-saving vaccines. And in terms of politics, misinformation, disinformation can result in different parties being elected and therefore different policies being implemented, and that leads to different realities that people live under. And these forces erode the belief that people live in a legitimate society, a society where the rules are clear and fair, and therefore people lose faith in their government and in the authorities. This in turn means that people's lives will be diminished. So both in terms of health, welfare, and economics, let alone politics and liberty, these are a dagger at our throats.
Yeah. Everything in these days remains like in fact-checking. But how the governments can address disinformation in this area of artificial intelligence, social media, without harming the freedom of expression?
Mm-hmm. Well, freedom of expression is a fundamental value, not only related to human liberty and the essence of what it means to be an active citizen, but also it's the way that we can shine light on the activities of governments and corporations and unions and other groups, so that we can understand what kinds of activities they're engaging in. And in particular, if they're engaging in illegal, corrupt, or unethical practices, freedom of expression allows people to discover the truth and propagate the truth to others. So we have to be careful when we fight fake news and disinformation that we are not cutting into people's ability to be checkers on their institutions and just as humans able to express their viewpoints. So I think artificial intelligence has a lot to offer in terms of validating information to make sure it's reliable, identifying fake information and staunching its source, and finally allowing people to get the information they need and get it reliably.
Now, what's the role of the civil society on this? In countries like Brazil, in the context of COVID and election, the role of civil society has been studied extensively. There will be many strategies that go beyond fact-checking and education, for example, make the data more accessible to citizens. What are your views on these things?
I think civil society is, of course, the way citizens are able to influence their governments and influence the regimes that control the lives of themselves and also the foreign policy. The ironic situation is that only certain people are interested in civic society. Only certain people want to get involved. Most citizens in most countries, most of the time, don't want to get involved. They want to live their life in peace and tranquility and not under the scrutiny of the government. However, without involvement by the citizens, the government and other agencies in society extend their grip over individuals. And as a result, people end up living in societies where there is authoritarianism and over control of individual lives. So the irony is that if people want to live in tranquility and not under the yoke of an abusive government, they actually have to get involved in controlling the government against their natural inclinations. So I think the challenge for those who are truly concerned about civil society and truly concerned about getting full democratic participation need to reach out to those groups that tend to reject getting involved in the civic society so that the policies can be fully representative of all sectors of the people. And I think one of the great things about your foundation is that that's what it's trying to achieve. It's trying to get a full picture of what people's views are, not just what the loudest voices in the room say.
Thank you. Professor Katz, a few years ago during your last visit to Chile, you mentioned that technologies will make us less dependent on others and we will be more alone. How do you assess that statement 7 years later? How has the development of the artificial intelligence impact on that?
Lots of surveys show that people have fewer friends nowadays than they did compared to those people around a decade ago, who in turn had fewer friends than those who were in the decade before. So it seems that one of the unfortunate byproducts of our new technologies, our social media and our streaming of wonderful, entertaining, gripping programs is less social interaction among people. Now, I think we tend to exaggerate just how isolated people are because people still go to baseball games, go to football games, go to operas, museums, all kinds of civic engagement, still very high. But what we see is an erosion in very close relationships. And this is also reflected in marital patterns where there's fewer family formations, fewer children, fewer long-term partners and marriages. So all this we have to lay at the threshold of social media, artificial intelligence, and our array of ever more exciting, ever improving communication technologies. And now with AI companions, the trend is only going to get worse. So although I like being right in my predictions, I'm afraid in this case, being right is no satisfaction.
Yes. So in that way, how do you see the rise of the artificial intelligence in probably the next 5 years? It is estimated that generative AI will move to one that takes action, like negotiating the prices, organizing activities, or as I said, you are no Ari, and the music will be like personalized for yourself, and so on. How do you see the world with AI in 5 years?
I see the world as being more of the same, only more so. I think an analogy really is our food and diet. So even though there's more food for more people and more varieties of food for people, and we know a lot more about healthy eating, we still face an obesity epidemic and a dietary epidemic of too much sugar and sweets and other carbohydrates. So we have the knowledge, we have the productivity, we have the ability, but what do? We ignore it and continue to eat worse. And you see that with the epidemic of obesity spreading around the world, more or less following convenience stores. Where there's a convenience store, you find growing obesity. I see the same thing in terms of artificial intelligence. And so we're able to have more individualized entertainment, tailored exactly to what we would like. And yet that may make us happier just the way having a donut makes us happier. But over the long term, just like the donut, it'll make us less happy.
In education, there are cultures that are more challenging than others. In new areas, there seems to be more inclusion of these technologies. Other more classical, like laws or philosophy, continue to be more challenging. How this phenomenon addressed in university comprehensively, like how this phenomenon could be managed.
Are you asking how we can manage the problems of artificial intelligence through new laws and policies?
Yes.
That's a good question, and I'm glad to answer it to the best of my ability, which is that we need to have a historical perspective on the situation. People used to feel that automation would eliminate all jobs in the world and people would have nothing to do and be depressed because they had nothing to do. Well, what we found instead is that people are busier than ever. They feel that they have less time available than ever. Moreover, we find that there are predictions about the future that just don't come true. And the idea that AI will control every aspect of our life, well, that's not going to come true any more than the fact that we have cameras and we have computers, and they don't connect, correct, or challenge all of our activities. So we still have a lot of freedom despite the progress in technology. The government, like any government, wants to expand its power and control. If it identifies a problem, it wants to create policies to address that problem. That's human nature. That's the nature of government. As one of our founding figures, James Madison, pointed out, the way to control the grabbing of power is to create competing grabbers of power, to compete with the first grabber of power. And it's through competition, through conflict over policies from independent groups is the best way to control this. So I think while the government wants to create commissions and panels and organizations to control AI, we, the people, need to have independent bodies, not sponsored directly by the government, that can keep track of, keep check on the governmental bodies so that we can have the fruits of technology, not overly regulated, but also protected from the temptation to go beyond what is legitimate use of power by governments and by corporate entities.
Mhm. It's very interesting because we are discussing again the censorship, controlling what the thoughts, the expression, even though we have passed over 80 years from the Second World War, where we see these regimes that control everything that we should think or say. So it's interesting how the history cycle, and we are talking about this again. So I want to know, in your vision that you have been researching about emerging technologies and the mobile phones, what are the difference between the mobile phones revolutions of the cell phones 20 years ago with this one, the AI revolution? Did you feel that the cell phones will revolution everything, or this is a new feeling that you feel that this is too big to handle?
Thank you. My feeling about mobile phones from the very beginning is it will change many aspects of life, but reinforce, strengthen, and maybe even exaggerate some of the fundamental factors of life. So, for example, we actually don't spend as much time talking on the phone, the mobile phone, as we did in earlier eras when people spent more time talking on the mobile phone. They discovered that talking is too intense of an activity to do as much as they did initially, and now they turn to texting and short message services, things like that, to communicate because it's much briefer. And it has changed, of course, how people relate to one another, especially families, how the members relate to one another. And yet they still relate to one another. They still have needs for contacting each other that they've always had, except now they even have more of them, and they can be richer and more nuanced. So I see something similar happening with AI. People will be able to get the information they want, get the entertainment they want. It'll be more tailored to their individual tastes. And at first they'll probably heavily indulge in it, but then over time it will moderate. And people will find a good balance because, after all, as interesting as streaming television is, and other forms of video, after a while people want to get up and get out. And we see that, once again, in museum attendance, in sports attendance. People around the world want to build multi-billion dollars, pesos, stadiums when they could watch even more closely at home, but no, they want to go and watch their sports team live and in person. So I think we'll find a good balance between our technology and our physical reality.
Professor Katz, thank you very much for joining us in this occasion. It has been a real privilege to have you here in Piensa. Y a quienes vieron este diálogo Piensa, los invitamos a suscribirse a nuestro canal para que revisen lo último en Fundación Piensa, puedan seguir disfrutando conversaciones como esta y estar también interesados respecto a los diferentes trabajos que hacemos en la Fundación para que puedan estar al día de lo que estamos investigando, de nuestras propuestas de política pública y para que el día de mañana podamos hacer de la región un lugar para ir. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.